You should all get a little notification at the top saying it's recording now. I'll now do a roll call to see who's present and introduce everyone. When I call your name, if you could just say present. The chair of the meeting today is Darren Price from Carmarthenshire.
Present.
Lovely. We have Lyndon Jones from Swansea.
Present.
Peter Black, Swansea.
Present.
Wyn Thomas, Ceredigion.
Present.
Endaf Edwards, Ceredigion. I know you're there, Endaf. I've seen you. Yeah. Davis has given her apologies from Powys, as has Sandra Davis from Powys. John Davis from Pembrokeshire has also given his apologies. We do have Paul Rappy.
Present.
And Edward Thomas, I believe, has given his apologies also. We have officers, Ian Altman, ERW Managing Director.
Present.
Greg Morgan, ERW Managing Director.
Present.
And Gareth Morgans, who's the lead Chief Exec.
Present, all present.
Lovely. We have scrutiny officers, Lisa Evans.
Present.
Lydia Evans.
Present.
Michelle Evans-Thomas. And apologies from Wyn Richards. There we are. That's everyone. So I'll hand you over to Darren Price, who's the chair.
Great. Diolch yn fawr, Michelle. Thank you very much for that, Michelle, in terms of introductions, and welcome all to the to this meeting. We haven't got it translated today, I understand, so I'll do the I'll run the meeting bilingually as we go along. So croeso chi gyd, fel ni'n sôn. We should have been meeting down in Carmarthen physically today. Sunny Carmarthenshire, I should say. So you've all missed out there, but welcome to you all, and I hope you're keeping well wherever you're tuning in from. Newn ni symud mlaen i'r item yn ffurfiol nawr te. So yn hermed ymddeiriadau am absenoldeb, in terms of apologies for absence, we've received 3 apologies. Could you show that you're happy to note those apologies, please? Thank you very much. I'll move on then to item 2, rhif 2 ar yr agenda, hynny yw datganiadau o fuddiant. Are there any declarations of interest at this stage? No. Everyone happy to carry on? Da iawn. Newn ni symud mlaen te item 3 ar yr agenda. Hynny yw y llythyrau a'r nodiadau sy'n deillio o grŵp craffu'r cynghorwyr nôl yn mis Ionawr. We move on now then to item 3, which is the letters and the notes arising from the previous ERW Councillor Group meeting on the 27th of January. There are 3 items here. Clearly, we've got the notes of the meeting themselves, the letter that we wrote to the Joint Committee dated the 13th of February, and the response that we received then from the Joint Committee, the letter dated the 6th of March. Now, clearly, a lot of the themes that are noted within the minutes and included in the letters form part of the discussion this afternoon under item 5. Unless there's anything in particular that members want to raise at this stage, are you happy for us to note them here and then move on to the next item? Or does somebody wish to raise something at this point?
Happy to note them.
There we are. Could we all show by raising your virtual hand then that you're happy to note them and move on? Great. Diolch yn fawr. Unrhyw yn erbyn? Anybody against? Na, pawb yn hapus. Na ni. Newn ni symud mlaen te item 4 ar yr agenda. A adroddiad yw hwn, rwy'n deall, ar y cyd rhwng Gareth, Ian a Greg, sydd yn nodi y goblygiadau ac effaith Covid o ran ERW dros y misoedd diwetha. Diweddariad ar lafar yw a bydd yna gyfle ar ôl ni wedyn i ni fel cynghorwyr i ofyn cwestiynau yn herme'r adroddiad. So we move on to item 4, which is a joint report between Gareth, Ian and Greg. As I understand it, looking at the implications and impact of COVID on ERW specifically over the last few months. So I'll hand over to the officers, and after that then there'll be a chance to ask some questions from members. Jeff.
Diolch Cadeirydd, pnawn da. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to meet with you today, really share a progress report really on how ERW has responded to COVID. Just for information, since your last meeting, Mr. Andy Morgan, who was the interim managing director, retired. And then Mr. Jan James, who was the assistant MD, took on the interim leadership of the consortium until his retirement at the end of August. So following an internal recruitment process, we currently have Mr. Greg Morgan and Mr. Ian Altman, who are both part of the ERW senior management team, appointed as interim chief officers until the end of the financial year. So can I thank Ian and Greg really for their work since September. And they will kind of take you through maybe some of the highlights of the past few months. I am aware as well that Michelle has shared some reports with you, which are kind of up-to-date reports, which you can take your time to go through maybe after the meeting, which were prepared by Andy and Jan over the summer and their terms in charge. And I know Greg and Ian have built on that model since September. I'm aware that Greg and Ian will do a double act really. They're going to share some slides, but they're also going to talk through some of the highlights and also some of the issues possibly that we've been facing over the past few months in supporting schools across the region and dealing with COVID as well. Greg?
Gret, diolch. Diolch Gareth a diolch Cadeirydd. Gyda cyniatad na I rannu'n sgrin, with permission I'll share my screen to start the presentation. Gobeithio bod chi'n gallu gweld yn sgrin. I hope you can.
Yep, iawn.
Okay, great. Dechreuwch hwnna. Fel dwi'n gweud, diolch am y cyfle I siarad gyda chi heddi. As Gareth pointed out, we've been in post since September, Ian and myself. We were previously part of the ERW structure, and we have been for 5 years or so. So we're familiar with the regional approach to work and supporting schools, and we were very grateful for the opportunity to step into these roles. We'll talk you through the reports that Gareth referred to. There are 2 reports. We'll touch on some of the communication. I look back at some of the notes from previous meetings, and I noted that ERW were challenged to continue to develop the communication systems further, and we'll touch on that throughout the presentation. We'll dip into the business plan quickly. Ian will talk us through how that's been looked at and developed, and we'll also just touch on the budget and how that's being used. So with permission, I'll start with the first slide. This just gives us an overall gyda llaw. It's a bilingual presentation. Each alternate slide is in English and Welsh, and will be available to anybody that would like a copy at the end of the meeting. Every other slide will be in the different language, but of course I'll go through in English so everybody can follow. So this is the current structure. As Gareth pointed out, there are 2 chief officers in post now. That has resulted in some vacancies further down in the structure because we had an internal process to second colleagues into Ian and my substantive posts. And there are 1 or 2 other empty roles for various reasons. We had a seconded head teacher, for example, who understandably returned to her school during this pandemic. So there are 1 or 2, but that gives us an overall idea of the structure of ERW currently. As I said, we've got a couple of reports to mention, and I'll hand over at this point to my colleague Ian Altman to continue with the next bit. Diolch, Ian.
Diolch, Greg. I think the last time I met everyone was up in Llangryndol Wells in January, and we were talking about potential examination outcomes for our learners across the region. As part of my previous role as lead for secondary curriculum and examinations, and little did we know the position we would be in and what would happen in March really. And the first report that's on the screen now, and again you will have had a copy of, or you will have a copy of, is really the work that ERW officers undertook really between the end of March, or March the 24th, from lockdown right until the end of the academic year, and it's quite a weighty document. There's a variety of different areas we supported. The Welsh Government Continuity of Learning Plan was one, which was the initial phase of distance learning effectively. So there were 12 deliverables in that plan that we were supporting, some of which were to do with teaching and learning and developing resources, some of which were around Welsh medium, and some of which was around distance learning in supporting schools to be able to support their learners at home. Obviously the schools were open, but as hubs at that point. So it was a steep learning curve, I think, for the profession and also for us really on how we supported colleagues. So in the document there, you've got a summary of engagement really in distance learning events, some webinars that we ran, and they range from some very basic how to use Microsoft Teams, which we hadn't used very much until that particular date, and lots of people are in the same position, right through to how best to use Microsoft Teams to give learner feedback and support learning effectively. So it did move very, very quickly. We did an audit in terms of how many schools were using Hub effectively and were able to even provide learning at home for their pupils. So in that report, it really does give a profile of what the ERW support and the practice was. We continued to run network events and other events virtually to support learners. We didn't know at that stage what would happen with exams, for example, and obviously that emerged much later on in the year. So we continued to support as effectively as we could really. And also in that document then, it moves from distance learning really to blended learning when we were aware of the fact there would be a model where learners would be potentially in and out of school. The agenda changed slightly really on how to maximise that learning within school and also support learners when they're out of school. And that's something that is still ongoing. The impact of it is less easy to judge. We've had Eston in this term, looking at some of these issues. What we can talk about a little bit more confidently is engagement and, the will of the profession to support their learners as effectively as possible. And there's various bits of data in there in terms of, number of days supporting a variety of projects, work with LA officers in terms of their local delivery, and a whole range of different activities that the ERW Central team had done, either to support the national agenda or to support schools more locally. Greg, if you can just go to the next slide, please, if you don't mind. Yeah. So the second one is the work essentially since Greg and I have been in post from the start of September. So this will be updated at the end of this term to give a full flavour of the work that ERW officers have done centrally during the autumn term. It's a slightly different format. We decided to change it to really link in with the areas of the plan. The majority of it is a focus on blended learning and supporting schools with that particular agenda. But there is a lot of reference to professional learning as well, really, in terms of what schools and leaders and LSAs, for example, could access from us during this period as well. So it really does look at the whole range of things. So right through from the fairly obvious curriculum areas that we support, through professional learning and leadership and work with our HEI colleagues. So there's some 57 pages there, I think, really of officer activity. So some schools are in a position where they were ready to make the next steps really in terms of their professional learning for the new curriculum. Others are in a position where they really needed support, due to particular spikes in coronavirus in their particular area, with blended learning and resource building and supporting that learning experience. And I think that the sense is from a variety of groups really that the profession's made significant strides in the period since March, and there's lots of value in there that really will be held on to. I think schools will confidently say that things like learner feedback and setting of homework, etc., will be strengthened during this particular period. So the report hangs on the 6 different areas of the business plan, really, as well as a range of stakeholder groups, really, that ERW officers are involved in, from Welsh Government work to Estyn work to work in all 5 of the local authorities, really. Okay, Greg.
Okay, diolch, Ian. Those reports have been kindly sent around by Michelle previous to the meeting. Unfortunately, the current one that Ian and I have put together hasn't come back in time from the translation unit. As soon as that does come back, we'll send those out as well. The first report referred to is available in English and Welsh currently and has been sent around. I understand, due to the size of the files, 1 or 2 emails bounced back to Michelle, but we'll make sure that we do get copies of both reports to you following this meeting today. Coming back to the communication I touched on at the start, we were aware that we needed to streamline communication with all stakeholders, and one area that we put together, that Ian and I put together since September with the full support of the team, is a new standalone site highlighting the ERW professional learning offer. Exactly what is available from ERW currently. It's live. Anybody can view it, and you're welcome to view it yourselves afterwards. If you visit the ERW website, eru.cymru now eru.wales, there's a link on the front to the professional learning offer under the purple booklet there. And if I just go live onto it just for a second, you come to this page and you click on the little link. Mae popeth yn ddwyieithog wrth gwrs. You have a menu at the top, and you can decide the language you wish to browse in. And as you see, we've followed the same structure where possible as the business plan. This gives the message to schools exactly what ERW does do as well. So it clarifies that, hopefully. So the Curriculum for Wales support, the secondary support, the teams that supported those areas, the research, leadership, etc. Okay. If I just dip into one for a second, if I dip into the secondary support area, you can see the events that are currently running or have been running this term. And you can also dip in further, you can drill down further into what we call Dolen, which is our site for resources and sharing of practice. And you'll have extra information about various events and engagement events that are being run by ERW colleagues in there as well. It's just a little slow coming up on the screen there. But these are freely available to all our schools. They're sent out in communication to everybody, and you can just see from this particular slide here, this is one part of it, but you can see there's an awful lot of work going on. It has to be said that the effort to take this from face-to-face engagement with schools into this virtual online world that we live in at the moment, there's been a huge effort from the whole team, but we've reached a point, and as Ian said, we continued throughout lockdown to engage with schools as quickly as possible through this virtual environment, and that's blossomed now, really. What we found is attendance at various events is actually probably higher due to the fact that people can dip in at convenient times. As this meeting is being recorded, our webinars, for example, were recorded, put online, made available to schools, and then people can dip into these support packages at their convenience, and we're seeing a higher level of engagement perhaps than we would have had face to face. So as and when we get through this pandemic, we'll certainly have this blended approach to things as well, because it seems to suit people on the timetable of a busy school day as well, and not having to release people for a whole day perhaps and be able to engage as and when is convenient to them. So that's all available online, and by all means have a look at that after the meeting, as I say, just to see what's available from us as an organisation. At this point, we're going to move on now to the business plan, and I'll hand back to Ian for the next bit. Diolch, Ian.
Diolch, Greg. It's just really an opportunity to give a quick overview of the business plan. As I said, the activity report from September is under these 6 headings, as well as some additional ones in terms of how effectively we've delivered. And I'll talk a little bit about monitoring of that plan. It certainly hasn't been business as usual for anyone, but most of the areas on the business plan have still been something we've been able to support and move forward really in terms of even working in a distance way or a blended way with our partner schools really as we move forward. So the areas of the business plan are on the slide there. They're really our strategy groups, so our groups that were originally formed as decision-making groups and monitoring groups really in terms of the business plan. So the curriculum area covers both the work of the secondary team and the work of the curriculum and the innovation team, so the Curriculum for Wales team. We've got a professional learning research, equity and well-being, which was very much the first focus in March really. You know, it was the one area that Welsh Government quite rightly were very keen to prioritise in terms of learner well-being and staff well-being as well. So we've run a number of events there in order to help schools to support those learners. Obviously we don't know those learners individually, but you know, we have got professional learning to support schools to support those learners, the leadership, the digital skills, which have obviously been a huge focus over this period, and Cymraeg, and special schools and educational alternative settings really features in each of those areas. So rather than having a separate area on the business plan, you'll be able to see in the report that the work with that sector is also featured there. So really the monitoring of this business plan, these strategy groups will meet before the end of this term. They didn't meet last term for understandable reasons, that the head teacher representatives, particularly on those groups, just simply didn't have the time. They had other priorities to deal with, but we will reconvene them to give them an update on both the budgets for those groups and in terms of progress in the business plan. In terms of monitoring the work of the business plan, I know it's been something that's been noted previously, and has been a sort of comment from audit really in terms of when we're doing our midpoint monitoring. So we have now got essentially an Excel spreadsheet that monitors each one of those areas. So there's a high level statement really in terms of what we would like to achieve in each area. Then there's the more granular level 2 detail there that you can see on the screen there, and it's simply a RAG rated system really for doing the monitoring, with some progress comments, and some of these are relatively brief. Obviously we're almost at the end of Q3 now. The first one there is green because it's about online safety and access of learners and stakeholders really to the appropriate systems. Well, that's one area that has accelerated and has really gone from strength to strength, partly because it had to. I'm sure we would have prioritised it anyway, but it's clearly something that all schools across Erin, across Wales have made significant strides in how they communicate with their learners and how they ensure that there is online safety. The second one, for example, the first cell there is red simply because it's about delivering coding clubs and supporting coding clubs in schools. We weren't able to go in and support that particular agenda, so it was inevitably going to be red during the first term. The second quarter, that conversation has started to evolve, so it's kind of moved from red to amber. And it may be something that will remain amber simply because of the circumstances during the lifespan of this business plan. And then the third one there is just an example from the secondary team with a little bit more evaluation in terms of how they've continued, or we've continued as a team, to run network meetings and prioritise teaching and learning. They've all got blended learning on the agenda. The attendance from middle leaders, from heads of department, has been very, very strong. We've had schools very willing to share good practice. We've had schools very willing to share things they didn't get right at the start and what their learning curve has been like, really, and they're equally as valuable.
Okay, diolch, Ian. O ran cyllid, ERW, as far as the I'm not going to go into pounds and pence today, but as far as the impact of COVID is concerned, I just wanted to make everyone aware of that as far as ERW is concerned. As you can see, the funding that comes into ERW, 90% is passed directly to schools and LAs. That's passported directly out. 1% is kept for EWC funding for NQT programs, and then that just leaves 9% that's retained by ERW. That 9% is used for two functions: staff and admin costs, and for the implementation of the business plan. As far as the impact of COVID is concerned, the Welsh Government imposed a 3% saving on the total grant. But what we did internally, and thanks has to go to Natalie, our senior accountant, for all the hard work around this as well, is we protected the funding to schools and staff salaries, where 100% was protected there, but that did then result in a 20% cut to workstream budgets. So to be able to deliver the business plan is proving challenging because of these cuts. There are obviously some savings in other areas as far as the way we now deliver online, which is probably a cheaper way of delivering things, but perhaps some would argue not as effective as sitting in a room. So there are pros and cons, but the impact was that initial 3% saving had to be dealt with internally, and as I say, the 20% cut is then being discussed with the strategy groups, and revised plans are then being hopefully signed off and agreed in those groups, but before the end of term, as Ian alluded to earlier. Finally, from us, as I touched on at the start, there's a challenge around the communication. We've got a number of systems available to us, and what Ian and I did in September, we sat down and looked at them and tried to streamline the communication with different stakeholders. So we've got the ERW website, the Twitter feed, and our general newsletter that anyone can sign up to, and those are available to all. They're web-facing, and anyone can sign up to those and engage with our website. We've then got 3 systems that we use to engage directly with schools. Dolan, I touched on earlier, that's the originally was put in place as a system to share practice across schools. It took on a new function at the start of lockdown. It's where we then were able to share our resources, as Ian touched on, about the how-to guides and any other webinars that were being hosted and so on. And Dolan took on a slightly different life over this pandemic, which is great because it's now a go-to area for schools to as far as resources and other activities are concerned. We've got the professional learning offer site that I dipped into earlier, and that's available to all. And then we've got specific head teacher newsletters that go out regularly to all schools. We've got 2 other systems available to us. We've got the Hub networks, and they've been used really well for the last 3-4 years, particularly with middle leaders, for example. It's a closed community where information and resources can be shared with a specific group. And since the start of lockdown, we as an organisation have certainly engaged with Microsoft Teams, as we are doing today, far more than we had previously. And that has been that has facilitated all meetings and enabled us to continue functioning effectively as an organisation. And again, that would be a specific audience for specific meetings being facilitated through we are today. Hopefully that's given you an overview of where we stand currently and what we've achieved through this lockdown period. It's been a challenging period for all. As Gareth said at the start, Andy and Jan led us through the first half of that period, and Ian and I are now taking the reins and hopefully lead us through the next period successfully to deliver the business plan as it currently stands. Diolch.
Gret, diolch yn fawr i'r tri o chi am y cyflwyniad. Mae'n amlwg mae wedi bod yn amser heriol iawn I bawb yndyfe. It's been certainly been a challenging few period then, you know. And thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up now to questions from members. I'll maybe kick off while we wait for others to show their hands. But obviously the distance learning, the blended learning, that's something that's you know, that's challenged all schools initially. I know that there are a lot of schools now across every county, no doubt, that are showing you know, good practice and really getting on top of this now. I'm just wondering if you could expand maybe in terms of what role you've played in that, in terms of that sharing of good practice, because certainly there were some schools that maybe weren't quite at the same level as their you know, as others then, you know. So if you could maybe expand on how you've gone about that. Yeah.
Of course. Shall I come in first on that one? When we first went into lockdown, I was in my substantive post of lead for digital learning across ERW, and as such, in that role, we quickly convened two groups. There was the continuation of learning group run by the Welsh Government, and then one within ERW where we liaised with the LAs as well. So we ensured that all support necessary and anything that was required by the Welsh Government or LAs was being facilitated and coordinated by those meetings. So I worked closely with colleagues from the other regions. So there was a cross-regional group, and we made any resources and webinars, etc., that were produced by that particular group. There was an agreement, whereas previously we might have kept them within our region. There was an agreement, given the circumstances, that everything was made available across Wales. So we benefited from the other regions and, of course, our input into that. And then we worked closely with the LAs through our ERW continuation of learning group, where we'd meet regularly, at least once a week, and quite often 2, 3, 4 times a week, to ensure that the needs of the schools across our region were met. So I'd meet regularly with the LA Digital Leads, for example. There'd be groups for each particular area of the continuation of learning group meeting on regular basis, and then we'd meet with leaders from each of the LAs as well to ensure that coordination was in place. We'd also then liaise with the schools. We working with the challenge advisors across the LAs, we sensitively approached the schools because of the situation they were in, to see where they stood as far as being able to deliver distance learning in the first place that became blended learning. And schools fell into 3 categories quite naturally. The ones that were already engaged with that sort of technology already and quite familiar with it, and were in a position to actually share that practice with others. There were schools then in that in a second group that were delivering the distance learning effectively, but weren't perhaps at the stage where they were happy to share that outside their own school. And there were schools who quite honestly held up their hand and said, well, we need a little bit of help here. So what we did then, we coordinated and worked with the schools who were in a position to share, and we involved them and we brought them into webinars. We produced some case studies and so on that we shared with other schools to build on the practice in those schools that were ready to and able to share. And that had a really effective knock-on effect on those schools, because not only did they get the sort of nuts and bolts from us, but they got the warts and all then from the schools that were actually engaging with this technology already. So that was a really effective way of sharing that practice, was getting head teachers and other practitioners on screens like this, talking to colleagues from other schools and saying, well, yeah, this worked, this didn't work, we tried that, we tried this. And that was a very much a collegiate approach at the start, where we work closely with a number of schools from throughout the age range, then from primary through to secondary.
Right, yeah. I mean, in terms of the audit, then initially, in terms of the three different bands there, are you confident that there aren't any schools now in that third band, or are you still working on supporting some schools in particular?
I think that because of the churning staff, there will always be individuals within schools that will need support, and that's been again coordinated with the LAs and the officers in the local authorities as well. We're in a far stronger position than we were previously, and we know that because of the local intelligence coming back from challenge advisors and LA colleagues as well. So I'm confident that I think that the activities being held through the recent fire break, for example, were far more effective than perhaps some of the practice that was in place back in March, if I'm completely honest. Yeah.
Oh, my Ian, you're on mute.
Every meeting, apologies everyone. I think the issue in March was really that schools were desperate to get stuff up there for their learners to access, and it's evolved enormously, but since then there's been much more quality assurance going on in terms of what type of work is up there. And I think some schools were expecting way too much of their learners at home, really, when they were, you know, 6 hours of work a day, etc., with, you know, no feedback whatsoever. I think schools have got much more agile in the way they deliver it, and much more reflective, really, in terms of what good practice looks like. You know, even if it's probably going to be another 6-12 months down the line where we can really look at impact of that work, I think the practice is much stronger now, and even our weaker schools in terms of being able to deliver this at the start are in a much stronger position now.
Yeah, there we are. Great. Gareth, you want to know?
Yeah, just a couple of points from me. Kind of as an user of this service, I think the two main things for me was the support provided by ERW for training and upskilling staff. I think that was really valuable and still is valuable, because I think there are more courses now about how blended learning moves to the next level. And the second part probably is the other resources created by the specialists in ERW to support school practitioners at that early part of this process, where, you know, they were challenged by getting packs together. So I think the ERW contribution to that work was really valuable, and some really nice innovative projects as well introduced around well-being and around understanding the COVID challenge as well. So you know, those two things stand out for me as kind of for Carmarthenshire.
Right, diolch Gareth. Na i ofyn, os oes na unrhyw gwestiynau pellach da aelodau, are there any other members who want to ask a question on this report? If you could show by raising your virtual hand, that would be great. Or are you quite content with what you've heard? Quite content? Oh, Lyndon.
Great, sorry about that. Yeah, I just wondered what the position was with IT equipment across the region for pupils, because I know it's something in Swansea that we did take quite seriously in making sure that pupils actually had access to, you know, equipment to use.
Yes, if I can come in on that one then. Yes, obviously there are issues at the start, and we from day one of lockdown, then the schools that might have been perhaps caught out is the wrong word, but you know, that we knew that there would have been families at home without that provision to be able to engage with the learning. The funding that was available then from Welsh Government was coordinated at an LA level. Again, using the local intelligence from challenge advisors coming into the system there. From what we get reports from colleagues in the LAs, the digital leads and so on, that I work closely with, and that is being coordinated, as I say, from an LA point of view. From what I understand, things are far better. The schools have now got the systems to be able to put them. The kit from the school was put in the correct place. The purchase then of additional kit was coordinated and on a needs basis across the region. As well as putting the kit in place, what was all important as well was the understanding of that. And I think it's just worth pointing out that one of the branches of our work was supporting parents and carers as well. And we contributed to a number of resources that appeared on Hub to help the people at home to support the learners as well. So it was a two-pronged attack, really, getting the kit into the right places, and then the understanding of how to use the kit and access the learning at home.
Diolch yn fawr. Diolch. Os yna rhyw gwestiynau pellach, are there any further questions from members or any comments you'd like to make? I think one point I picked up on, I think Greg mentioned, in terms of the uptick for the professional learning offer. I was surprised to hear that you found an increase in uptake on the online offer. I would have thought, I'd have expected the position to have been, leaders would have been solely focused on, understandably so, on those sort of short-term health and safety issues and getting the new systems, operational in schools. So I mean, how much of an increase do you see in the uptake there? Because that's a positive to come out of this, isn't it?
I think it varied. For example, the middle leaders could engage far easily without having to be out of school for a day or whatever it normally would be, and be able to engage in a session like this to get that valuable information into the schools as quickly as possible. Some of the webinars we ran back in the summer, for example, based around the use of Teams, the use of Flipgrid, the use of various hub tools and so on, engaging with schools, the ones I spoke about, where head teachers and other practitioners presented also. The numbers were quite incredible. We were into the hundreds for a particular session, an individual session. I think that there was the need at the time, and we tried to meet the need with a range of these webinars. And the uptake on those was, we simply won't get those numbers into a room in anywhere across the region. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues. I agree, absolutely the focus of schools is, and it still is, to get teachers and pupils in safely and get them home safely at the end of the day. But there is still that need for professional development and professional learning to continue. And because of the how easy it is then to sit in front of a screen, time allowing, obviously, we have seen an increase in certain engagement events. And as I said, in some cases, it's far exceeded anything that we could have had physically in a room.
I think it's made agendas a lot more focused as well. When we sometimes run a whole day's network meeting for heads of English, for example, it would be them obviously travelling to and from the event, and we'd have an agenda of lots of sharing of items. I think reducing it to a 2-hour slot, for example, has just made that much more focused. And I understand it's been the nature of what schools want is blended learning. They wanted support with that, but I think it's also allowed colleagues in North Powys to attend a Swansea event without any difficulty, whereas previously they would have had that one day they would have been expected to be out of school, whereas actually they can dip into a virtual meeting or even watch a recording of it subsequently. So that's been very helpful, I think.
Yeah. And of course, the geography with the region has been something that's come up previously, isn't it? So yes, it directly addresses that issue. Yes. But there we are. Are there any further questions? Unrhyw gwestiynau pellach wrtho'r aelodau, neu ydyn ni'n hapus? Are we happy to note the presentation and the report? If we are, can we show by raising our virtual hands, please? Pawb yn hapus. Great, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. So with that, then we'll move on to the next item. Felly, item 5 ar yr agenda yw'r diweddariad ar y newidiadau I ERW a'r cynlluniau ar gyfer y dyfodol. So we move on to the update now on changes within ERW and future plans. Gareth, I ti'n mynd I arwain ar hyn? So over to Gareth Morgan to lead on this one. Diolch.
Sorry, na ni, newyddiant. Dwi'n credu bod yn bwrpasol I Ian a Greg I gyfrannu, agos mae'n gwirionedd mae hwn yn ymwneud â gwaith y cydbwyllgor, felly na I roi gwybodaeth ddiweddarau I chi o ran beth mae cydbwyllgor wedi bod yn gweithio yno. I don't think it's appropriate for Ian and Greg to contribute really, because this is in the realms of the joint committee. And the only update I can give you this afternoon really is in regard to the current situation and information and about the decisions that the joint committee in July and earlier this month as well, and all the papers for those meetings are available on ERW's website for information. There was supposed to be a meeting in March that was postponed. I think it was March the 19th that was postponed, and so the Joint Committee didn't meet until mid-July. And in the July meeting, the appointment of the new chair, so Councillor Emlyn Dole was endorsed as chair, and then the vice chair, Councillor Rosemary Harris from Powys, was endorsed as vice chair. And in that meeting as well, I was confirmed as lead director for the region. Now, the current position is that Neath Talbot left the consortium at the end of March 2020, and Ceredigion, Carmarthenshire and Swansea issued notices of withdrawal stating that they intended leaving ERW at the end of March 2021. Powys and Pembrokeshire have not issued such notices. Now, in the Joint Committee meeting in July, there was a commitment from Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire, Swansea, and in principle from Neath Talbot to develop a new partnership based on the Swansea Bay City region footprint. And Ceredigion and Powys advised that they would be developing alternative approaches to providing school improvement support services. Now, since Neath Talbot left the consortium, each partner authority's contribution have had increased really to address that shortfall and also to fund the new structure which was agreed back in September 2019. There were considerable challenges around the allocation of funding to ERW by the Welsh Government due to Neath Talbot leaving and working out really how to disaggregate that budget. And this wasn't resolved until the end of August after several meetings with Welsh Government. Now, in July, the Joint Committee discussed the request from Neath Talbot and Welsh Government that ERW continue to deliver some key national programmes for their schools. And these included a range of leadership, professional development and curricular support programmes. So in July, the Joint Committee did discuss that in detail, and eventually they did agree to that request. But on the grounds that there would be no financial detriment to ERW and the current partners. And to enable this to happen and to satisfy Welsh Government requirements, a deed of variation to ERW's legal agreement would be required. Now, due to pressure on local authorities and officers due to the pandemic and our work in supporting schools, it was agreed earlier this term that an additional resource would be required to support the proposed changes to ERW. So to that end, Mr. Kerry Davis, who is Pembrokeshire's head of HR, has been seconded into ERW to support officers with the change management and delivering on the Joint Committee's decisions. Now, Kerry is now in post and is providing valuable advice and guidance and working with us as officers. Now, the Joint Committee's most recent meeting was on the 13th of November. And at that meeting, some key decisions were made. The first one, that ERW's business plan and the monitoring processes were approved. Although we were nearly 3/4 of the year in, really, it was good to get that business plan approved. The proposed changes to the legal agreement to enable ERW to provide services to Neath Talbot schools was agreed. Decided as well that there should be a separate legal agreement developed between ERW and Neath Talbot around this to protect ERW's interests. Also in that meeting, the Joint Committee agreed to make a recommendation to each partner authority in accordance with Variation Clause 25 of ERW's joint agreement, that changes were made to the joint agreement. The first change to clarify how ERW could be terminated or dissolved. The second one was around the liabilities and indemnities of all present and former authorities. And the third part was to facilitate a reduced notice of withdrawal period of 3 months. Now, this change would clarify issues around drawing the current partnership to a close and also reduce the notice period to 3 months to enable those who have not issued notice to do so if they wished, so that the end of March 2021 termination could be implemented if that was the decision. Now, each partner has been contacted and I understand that they're all taking reports through the Cabinet Executive Board process to action these decisions. Now, the heads of legal from each authority as well are developing the variation to the legal agreement. In the meeting as well, the issue of the date of bringing the current consortium to an end was discussed. And in my report, I did propose that August the 31st would be an alternative date to the March one, and in my view, more manageable due to workload on staff, the HR processes needed, and also, in my view, it coincided with the end of a school year, because many of our programs run across school years for our schools. Now, there were different views in regard to this, and issues such as the budget cycle were raised. Now, it was agreed by the Joint Committee to hold a workshop to come to a decision around that date, and that is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon as it happens. So all 5 partners will meet tomorrow afternoon. Now, there were other reports in regard to budget and audit in the meeting on the 13th, and one of the recommendations from the head of internal audit as part of the annual governance statement was to implement a lessons learned review to establish really the failings or the issues around the current ERW model and incorporate any recommendations into the future consortia arrangements so that we ensure a sustainable model for the future. And hopefully this can be discussed and agreed tomorrow as well prior to setting up a new partnership. We also shared the latest version of the ERW Risk Register, which has been updated by the team. And there are a couple of new risks identified, namely one around the 2021 qualifications. We heard Ian mention earlier the last year as well. This year now there are no examinations, but there are issues around the qualifications process, which we need to identify as a risk, and also responding to the impact of COVID. Now, other risks have been reviewed and the scoring reduced due to mitigation. So one of them, communication with schools, which you've heard from Greg already, I think is there are improvements around that communication, and also about clarity on functions, because the business plan is really clear and articulate and the work streams are clear, and also complying with grant regulations. We have a strong team, a finance team, who are dealing with that aspect. That's really the outcome of the 2 recent joint committees. I'm happy to clarify some of the points made. However, maybe some of the questions you have are not mine to answer really, but maybe they are things to raise with the chair of the joint committee. Diolch.
Diolch Gareth, diolch am hwnna. Ie, mae wedi bod yn amser cythryblus iawn dros y blynyddoedd diwethaf, really. I'm sure that those members that have been members of the scrutiny group for the past couple of years will join me really in saying that it's been quite frustrating as members that the issue of structures, is something that comes up in nearly every meeting, and maybe we haven't been spending as much time as we should have been on actually focusing on school improvement and actually delivering for pupils. But here we are again. So I'll open it up to members. As Gareth said, he may be in a position to give answers, but I think it's important that we any concerns or views that we have, because clearly they will then form part of the letter that we will send, as we always do, at the end of this meeting to the joint committee with our thoughts. So I'll start off with Lyndon, and if others want to show by showing their hands as well, that'd be great. Diolch yn fawr. Lyndon.
Great, thank you, Darren. Yeah, I think, as you say, we spent a lot of time over the last 3 years looking at, talking about structures, because we've been, well, it's through, for varying reasons, lots of managing directors, and all this has created a load of uncertainty for staff within ERW, and also that uncertainty now even continues until you get an agreed date where everything is wrapped up and we start again. And I think huge lessons need to be learned, because really we can't go through this sort of process again.
Diolch Lyndon. Are there any other contributions from any other counties? We've gone very quiet. Ga I ofyn cwestiwn, Gareth, ga I ddechrau bant o'r lle. Obviously, you spoke about the potential for creating a new map, as it were, on the city deal outline. That would include 4 of the 6 councils. But clearly, if we go back a year or so ago, the initial concern from Neath Talbot at the time, of course, was around value for money, wasn't it? You know, that was, I think, Rob Jones, the leader's main pitch, if you like. You know, that there was a need to see more of the money going from Welsh Government money going directly to schools. You know, and we heard from, I think it was Greg or Ian earlier on, that at the moment ERW retain about 9% of that funding centrally, and that 90% go to schools. I'm just wondering, you know, what would change significantly simply by moving from a 6 authority model to a 4 model on a city region basis, how that would fundamentally change those percentages. I'm not sure if any discussions have taken place with Neath Talbot, you know, particularly on that point. But I'm struggling to understand how you make that leap, I suppose, you know, from the 6 to the 4, and then everyone's happy. I appreciate that might not be something that you can answer, but it's certainly something that comes into my mind, you know.
Yeah. If I can just comment, really, kind of, we as directors, we have met a few in summer and since September to discuss really what a new consortium would need to deliver for the 4 partners who are contemplating joining kind of forces, and we've got a function list which, you know, is similar to what ERW currently delivers for the authorities. We have discussed really the principles around the delivery, etc., but we're not at the point yet really where we've actually worked out really what the issues, and the issues being thrown around were geography, the size of the region, the number of schools, but in reality, you know, if we move to a model of 4 authorities working together, the budget will be reduced from Welsh Government, the funding will be disaggregated so that Ceredigion and Powys can get their share of that funding. And then, you know, do we develop a partnership which is also a commissioning partnership, in the sense that we might be delivering some services for other local authorities. But I think the point of the lessons learned activity is really to really clarify what the issues were, because I'm not convinced there is a value for money issue. Personally, I think from my perspective as a director, I get value from money from ERW in respect of the school that needs the support get it. I think that there has been a conflict in some authorities that maybe some of the funding is going to other authorities where the need is at the moment, at this point in time. But that, I think, was one of the principles at the start, that you know, funding would be spent where the greatest need is, and maybe some authorities don't believe they were getting their fair share of that funding on some occasions. You know, I think there is a principle that we are trying to get as much money into schools, and I think that's been implemented by Ian and Greg, to be fair. And over the past months, we've had additional funding, etc., and we've tried our best to get most of that money down to schools directly or into local authorities to provide those services for schools. But yeah, I think that's part of the conversation tomorrow, is, you know, what are the issues and how can we resolve those if there is a new partnership created of 4 local authorities.
Diolch, Gareth. Os yw'n arall mewn, are there any comments from others on that particular point before we move on, or do you want to bring in new points, any new questions? Everyone's very quiet, Jen. Guys, symud ymlaen, and I ofyn, clearly the evidence base, I suppose, as you mentioned there, is it the lessons learned review, isn't it? That's going to be fundamental, really, in terms of the discussion tomorrow then, because clearly any decision, you know, needs to be based on evidence, isn't it? You know, and what we don't want to see is a discussion taking place on maybe seemingly arbitrary lines on a map, you know, whereas actually what we need to be doing is tackling those concerns that councils had, you know. One issue that strikes me maybe with the potential modular of some authorities. I note that Powys and Ceredigion have suggested that they may be happy to pursue something, you know, on their own. the issue of equity, I suppose, in terms of the funding of the central pot for any new ERW. Because you mentioned Talbot this year now have been receiving services from ERW, and they've been contributing, I assume, through an SLA type structure, but that contribution will nowhere near cover, I'm assuming, their original contribution, central contribution to the pot. So there's a question then in terms of the financial fairness of a system where possibly 4 will take the hit in terms of establishing the central core ERW team, yet others may be benefiting from commission services. But those costs, of course, will be falling on taxpayers in other counties. So that, I'm sure, will be central to the discussions tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a fair point, because I think that was some of the discussion in the joint committee. I think we'd all like to be people who buy a service, and if we don't have to pay towards the core team. And in reality, you need that core team to deliver on the projects. So with the agreement with Neath Talbot, there will be an element there of service charge, as it were, for delivering those projects on top of the funding they've received from Welsh Government for those project areas. Because it takes Greg's time, Ian's, to manage these projects. So that's a key element, and I think there is kind of some dissatisfaction within the other 5 authorities that our annual subscriptions, as it were, have increased considerably, whilst maybe the partner authority getting some services is not paying at the same level. And going forward, of course, if that same model, we'll have to make sure that if we are providing services to other authorities, that is worth our while as a partnership.
Yeah, Gareth. I'd be interested to hear maybe what members feel from different parts of the region. I'm not sure if you're happy to contribute. Paul, from a Pembrokeshire perspective, I mean, what are your views on this? Obviously there's a key meeting tomorrow. Is there anything in particular you'd want us to raise in the letter that goes to the joint committee?
Well, a lot of this is new to me. I didn't know half of the things. I heard about Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Swansea last week. And then there was mention of the Swansea deal today in our scrutiny committee. And that was the first I heard of that. I don't think, looking at it, that Port Talbot should be paying less money towards something which they much. I mean, there's a whole system of people behind ERW working, making it work, and they're just putting in some money to get what they need. I think is not fair on the others, and I can see that be a problem. Pembrokeshire is very close to Ceredigion. I can't understand why Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion aren't working together either. I don't understand that. That's something else I don't quite understand. But then I don't know. If we're going to come up with a new model for this, that the lessons to be learned go back a long way, don't they? I can only talk about ERW in some respects when it was first created as a teacher and a head of faculty, and sometimes I had some issues with ERW which were very painful, and the way things were done in those days. But when Geraint came along, and wasn't it? He was managing director. He came out with things which made so much sense. It's a shame he never stayed, because he was doing things that what we wanted, and I'm talking as a teacher now, and that's not. It's not come out as much as it should have done, but it was the start. So really, I haven't got much to say other than that, I'm afraid. Yeah. And also, I've got to go and pick up my daughter from school now, because there's no after school because of COVID. So I'll have to give you my apologies, but it's been very enlightening, and I hope we meet up again soon with something to sort everything out.
Yeah. Chair, if I can make one comment, I think one of the principles we've agreed is that there is nothing stopping anybody working with somebody else on an agenda. For example, Carmarthenshire and Ceredigion would have some real common ground in respect to Welsh language development. So in the future, irrespective of the footprint, Carmarthenshire will be looking to work with Ceredigion, and maybe some of those challenges around upskilling teachers and supporting teachers of Welsh language. And similarly, there'll be opportunities to work with Powys as well. So I think, you know, that principle is also part of our kind of list already, is about, you know, we can work with other partners on different agendas.
Definitely.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Diolch, Gareth.
Right.
And o dy safbwynt di yng Ngheredigion, oes rhywbeth y ti i gyfrannu, unrhyw sylwadau, unrhyw gwestiynau gyda ti, beth ti'n codi ar gyfer yr cydbwyllgor fori?
Well, dim point here. No points I want to raise specifically for tomorrow. But one other point that has been raised in scrutiny meetings in Ceredigion is that perhaps a local county council would know the needs of the schools in that county perhaps better than a regional consortium would do. But also, I mean, as Paul said, what a separate point is that I don't see, speaking as a Cardi, why Neath Port Talbot should get the services but pay less than the others, the other consortium. Because from what I can see, it's the same services, so I don't see why they should pay less. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to make there.
Great. Diolch yn fawr, Endaf. Thank you very much for that. I'm looking at the membership here. We've heard from Linden. Peter, is Peter Black still on the call? Peter, are there any comments from your perspective, from a Swansea perspective, that you'd like to add to that?
I'm taking a different perspective. I mean, I understand all the concerns about the funding and the issues. I think the problem has been a fundamental one from the beginning, that any partnership you put up between local government is always going to be subject to changes in political regime and changes in political differences, and at some stage they're going to move on and change. So the ERW partnership, the City Deal regional partnership, they're all sort of quick fixes to avoid having to do a reorganisation of local government, aren't they, at one stage? And because they are quick fixes and put in place to try to get collaboration on a more formal basis, at some stage, some local authorities are going to come along and say, well, actually, our budget is under huge amounts of pressure. We're going to have to make some changes here. And this is one thing we can cut, and we can do things cheaper if we do it in a particular way. And those things start to fall apart as a result of that. And I think that any new system you put in place is going to have to take account of the new local government bill, which has come into place. They're now setting up statutory joint committees, which are meant to be strategic. But at some stage, is that going to be part of a local government reorganisation? Is that going to be a different footprint to what we have in ERW, which is already a different footprint to economic partnerships, already a different footprint to health partnerships, and social? And you begin to think the whole thing is a bit of a mishmash. So really, I think we're in a situation where the Welsh government is just going to have to bite the bullet and do things properly. But you know, that doesn't help you, I'm sorry, tomorrow. But you know, that's my perspective on this whole issue. That it is that this partnership is a temporary partnership because people's political priorities, the evolution, I think it's going to change. You're going to have different partners involved, different arrangements until something more permanent is put in place.
Thanks for that, Peter. A longer term view there.
Right.
But, yeah,
you know, that's where it is, isn't it?
Yeah. No, yeah. That's fair. Thanks for that, Peter. Just going back on the point of what's delivered where and by whom. You know, obviously, Gareth mentioned that Neath Port Talbot approached ERW jointly with Welsh Government then in terms of asking for the national programme, national schemes to be supported by ERW. Was that something that was, how can I put this, that was more pushed by Welsh Government as opposed to Neath Port Talbot, or is there a genuine acceptance then in Neath Port Talbot that actually there's a need for some sort of regional model to deliver those schemes? Because the reason I'm asking that is clearly those principles will apply equally in Powys and Ceredigion or anybody else who sits outside a future model.
I can't speak for my colleagues in Neath Talbot, but I think once they realised the scale of the job which they were taking on as an authority and all the different provision that ERW was providing to their schools, I think they must have realised they couldn't deliver that locally, and that the infrastructure was already in place within ERW. For example, we have the higher level teaching assistant programme that's delivered by ERW and has been for a number of years. And it's quite an intense process, and there's an assessment route, there's a training part of that. So ERW had that up and running, the newly qualified teachers program, the head teacher programs, all these set up with staff in ERW proficient and understanding those programs, and probably they couldn't turn that around in the time they had. I think it was a joint approach by Neath Talbot and Welsh Government in reality, because I think Welsh Government felt they had a duty towards schools in Neath Talbot accessing those programmes as well. And I think, our moral obligation in that joint committee came through really. We had to support those schools, or those head teachers and learners at the end of the day would suffer because they weren't accessing those programmes. In reality, if Neath Talbot didn't ask for those programs, we would still deliver them within the funding we had available. There is one issue possibly can I just raise, although I think that the original staffing complement of ERW agreed for September last year was about 45 staff members. We are down to 35 staff members at the moment, due to secondments or vacancies, and there is probably kind of and Greg and Ian would probably agree, there's a tipping point in being able to deliver the business plan based on 10 fewer staff in the structure that was agreed at the start of the year, and which kind of the business plan is based on. But yeah, the reality is though, in the future, if we become a commissioning model, it's got to pay its way in the sense of it's got to support the infrastructure as well, not just the cost of the programme.
Yeah, I think the point about the size of the team and the impact of this on the core ERW team, I think is something that's been raised as part of this scrutiny group over the last couple of years. I mean, the difficulty in recruiting to posts, given the uncertainty, it's a real issue, isn't it? And it comes at a time where we've got massive transformational projects, be it the curriculum, ALN transformation, so there's a massive risk from my perspective here in terms of this structural change and discussion taking place at possibly one of the most pressured transformational periods in Welsh education history, So I think that's something that's got to be at the forefront of people's minds here, because what we don't want to see is in a few years' time, if Mid and South West Wales are seen to be lagging on certain agendas, people start to ask questions of actually, why did you spend so much time discussing other issues as opposed to focusing on school improvement? So I think that's a very real issue. I think that that faces us all there. Just quickly, in terms of the on the funding side, from a school perspective, we've heard some frustration maybe in terms of the time scale, the time frame that it takes from getting Welsh Government announcements to that funding coming through at a local level. How risky is it? How much of a risk is it that with the new transition next financial year, that we'll see further delays, to that process?
It was compounded this year by the fact that one local authority had withdrawn, and it did take Welsh Government some time to work out the formula. That's interesting in the sense that there's a formula of generating the funding at the start, so it did take time. I think that then delayed local authorities directly giving the funding to schools. Now Welsh Government have got that formula, it should be easier for them to disaggregate the funding for next year. I am meeting with Welsh Government tomorrow afternoon as well, following the workshop with the 5 authorities, just to update them and also start having that conversation around, okay, if there are fewer members in ERW in April, how does the funding look for that financial year or that term? So it's on the agenda already about how that's, because I need that, we need that resolved before March, in the sense that it happens in April and we don't have another 6 months of waiting for for the budget to be developed. Yeah.
Diolch Gareth. Os na unrhyw gwestiynau pellach, unrhyw bwyntiau pellach, are there any further questions or comments that members would like to raise? Ie, Cynghorydd Thomas, de?
Ie, diolch yn fawr. Just o ran Ceredigion, it was found it difficult to convince council members of the benefits of ERW yn aml iawn achos yr ansicrwydd, because of the uncertainty, you know, when we were asked to report back. Because a lot of the posts in ERW had not been filled at various times. You know, that did produce a lot of uncertainty amongst members. Wedd na rhai yn gweld fel gwastraff arian. Some councillors did as not a waste of money, but money that could be better spent, and it was difficult to convince very often councillors of whether we were getting value for money. Ond I just moyn gweud y sylwadau na, diolch.
Gret, diolch. Endaf, ti'n mynd o mewn? Do you want to come in, Endaf, again? O, ti ar mute.
Sorry. I keep doing that. Right, as Wayne said, when we're asked to report back, and the last time I did that as chair was back in February, after the January meeting in Powys. And, well, as Wynne said, it's difficult to convince councillors of the value that Ceredigion was getting from ERW, and there were strong feelings expressed at that meeting in favour of leaving, and it was then came before the council's cabinet in March, and after that they voted in favour of leaving and giving notice.
Great, okay, diolch yn fawr I chi am yr cyfriniadau ni. There we are then, if there aren't any further comments or questions, we'll draw this item to a close then. I'll ask just formally, are you happy to note the report, if you could show by showing your virtual hands? Neb yn erbyn, anybody against? No, ni wedi derbyn yr adroddiad. Diolch yn fawr I chi, diolch I ti Gareth am trial ateb y cwestiynau. Fi'n deall yn iawn, dim ti yw'r person sy'n gallu ateb lot o'r cwestiynau ni, ond diolch yn fawr am y gwybodaeth ti wedi rannu gyda ni ta beth.
Iawn, diolch.
So we move on then to item 6, which is the discussion around the content for the letter now then to the chair of the ERW Joint Committee arising from this particular meeting. Michelle, do you want to summarise what you've got potentially from the discussions, or do you want me to confirm what as I see things following on from the discussion?
Sorry, it wouldn't come off. Yeah, if you could summarise that, you know, that you what you were saying, that would be really useful, because then I can I'll have two sides.
Yeah, there we are. Okay, so we've got, in terms of general themes then, I've tried to jot down sort of people's contributions or feelings. So yeah, I suppose the first one is around this issue of equity in terms of the funding, isn't it? In terms of any future model, I think any commissioning of services from a future regional consortium needs to be fair, and maybe the feeling that those authorities who make up the core of any future joint committee shouldn't necessarily be left out of pocket then, you know, in terms of setting up those central costs, whilst also providing some commissioned services to potentially some local authorities. Is that a fair reflection, members? Are you happy with that? Yeah. if you've got any queries in terms of my interpretation, please jump in and let me know, okay? But if not, we'll carry on. The second one, I think, was around the value for money issue, because clearly that was a concern that, well, Neath Talbot initially put forward through Rob Jones, and as we've heard in the meeting today with NDAV and Wyn, it seems to be a concern in Ceredigion as well. So I suppose clarity really, in terms of what substantial changes would there be made to any future joint committee, be it on a city deal frame basis or any other basis. What substantial change would there be to that core team and core budget, which would deliver this type of savings that maybe NDAV and Neath Talbot have mentioned? Because as we noted earlier, 90% of the funding currently goes directly to schools. So how is any new proposal going to increase that from that current level? I think that's a key point. In terms of looking at any lines on maps, I suppose there was a point about actually what's the evidence base for that. Is it focused on school improvement primarily? I know Gareth mentioned the lessons learnt review that's being presented to the different leaders tomorrow in the workshop. So it may be something that we could ask for in terms of, would we want to see that lessons learnt review, you know, and if so, when? You know, that's the question for members, I suppose. That's one point. I think the impact on the staff, on the ERW staff and the core team, I think is something we need to highlight, because clearly it's an unsettling time for them personally. But as I think we've sort of touched on, there are risks maybe in terms of actually how does the region deliver these national programs now, when we mention things like the curriculum, you know, and the ALN transformation program, for example. I think that's got to be central in people's decision making. The issue of next year's funding, can we ensure that the funding to schools won't be delayed as a result of any transition to whatever body comes in next? Yeah. And I think that's about it. Have I missed anything, members? Is there anything you'd want to add to what I've mentioned there? Or are we generally content, and that's a general summary where we are? Yeah, happy? Right, okay then. So, Michelle, does that sort of tally with the type of themes that you picked up on?
Yes, definitely. I just wondered if there was anything in the first section of the meeting that you wanted to put in the letter as well.
Yeah, I suppose if I'm being perfectly honest, it all becomes a bit academic, you know, in terms of looking to future business plans. If we're not yet sure of what it looked like, but I suppose there's scope potentially to note, I suppose, the positivity in terms of the online, you know, the online support that has been provided as a future model to any consortium, I suppose, to schools, and also note the support that was provided in terms of blended learning, you know, in particular maybe, and the sharing of good practice.
Particularly.
Anything else from members, or is that sufficient in your eyes? Yeah, happy? Okay, yeah, so I think that summarizes it, Michelle, if you're happy with that.
That's great. I will put that together and send it around to you all before, obviously before it goes out, so you can make any amendments or additions to it via the chair, of course.
There we are. Yeah, in terms of next meetings, obviously, theoretically there should be a meeting. I think, is it March time, Michelle?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what members' feelings are in terms of this. I mean, I suppose it depends. It's within our gift, isn't it, Michelle, to actually call a meeting whenever we want. Mm. Yeah. It's
just getting people together, but this is much easier, obviously, remotely than it is in a normal circumstance. So,
what are members' views? I suppose the key question for us here as a scrutiny committee is how much of a role do we want to play, and how involved do we want to be in shaping or, you know, discussing any future model? That's the key question. I'll open that to the floor for some suggestions and ideas. Linda, do you want to come in? Oh, you're on mute.
I beg your pardon. I think the lessons learned issue is key moving forward, because obviously we don't want to go back over the last 3 years. So I think that's obviously key, very important. And the other issue, of course, is will ERW be able to deliver over the next number of months with that sort of reduction in staff down from 45 to 35, because I don't think those vacancies are going to be easy to fill because of the uncertainty.
Yeah. So should we ask formally then for that lessons learned review for the should we ask formally for that as part of the letter, or?
I would think we should.
Yeah. And I suppose from that then we can make a decision as to whether we feel it's necessary to reconvene before March. Is that fair enough? Yeah. So just depending how things progress over the next few weeks and months on any future model, we can look to maybe put an additional meeting in. Is that acceptable, Michelle?
Yeah, just when you're thinking about that, the other thing that you may want to think about as well is how you'd like scrutiny to be reflected in the new model as well. And I'm not sure how that will work and how that will be integrated into the new model, but how you want to go through the transition period, and do you want to continue to meet through that transition period? And also, you know, how do you want the model to be? Do you want it to be the informal model it is now, whereby you get the chairs and the vice chairs from different panels onto the panel, or is it more of a formal joint committee, which I know a lot are going down for this sort of thing? So but then that tends to be allocated in a different way, so it doesn't tend to be the chairs and the vice chairs on those meetings. Those sort of things, you know, as well, how you want, you know, to move forward scrutiny wise as well.
Is that
That's
something
a discussion to be had, isn't it?
Yeah, is that something to pencil in for the next agenda then?
Yeah.
Because as part of that agenda, clearly we'd need to have the latest position in terms of any transition, isn't it? Even if it's March, actually, we'd probably still have, we will still need a COVID element in there in terms of an update in terms of what's happening on that front. And the scrutiny, our role, I suppose, within any new model is also something we need to discuss, isn't it? But I think, just picking up on that point, I think we meet twice a year. You know, let's be honest here, I don't think that's regular enough to be able to make a valuable contribution. I mean, we can see from the minutes of the meeting today that since we wrote the letter to the Joint Committee in January, well, there's been a change of chair, there's been a change of lead director, there've been lots of changes, and we haven't been anywhere near those discussions. And as Paul mentioned earlier, he wasn't aware of any changes until last week. You know, so there's a massive issue in terms of communication between the Joint Committee and the Scrutiny Committee, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the way that the system is set up at the moment. You know, so I think it's definitely worth looking at the next point. Right. Okay, then I will.
Sorry, Dan, can I just come in on that on Councillor Price? So just we do have the facility now to meet 4 times a year at the moment, because we've been funded Swansea to support that, so I can arrange for up to 4 meetings a year. Obviously, over the last 6 months or since January, we didn't due to the COVID situation, but there is the facility to do that, and I think we did 4 last year. But then obviously it's going to depend on sort of time and the ability to do that, really. But we do have the facility to do that, so that's something you can consider as well, really.
Yeah, I think it's important to see what comes from tomorrow's discussions and any sort of announcements that are made over the next couple of weeks and months now, isn't it? But I would just urge then maybe members to keep in touch with Michelle, and we'll try and make progress then, depending on what announcements are made. Does that sound reasonable to people? Yeah. Okay. Are you happy with that, Michelle?
Yeah, it's great.
There we are. Okay then, so good day. Thank you very much for your attendance, and with that I shall draw the meeting to a close. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd.